Looking shortly to this legal landscape in Turkey, I think one can say that data protection is still a very tricky question in Turkey. It is still not addressed how it has to be. And therefore the aim of my speech is to point out some major issues regarding the Draft Data Protection Act. The first part of my presentation will introduce you to the efforts to create a National Data Protection Act in Turkey. The second part will shortly mention the structure of the planned act. The third part will go into some details regarding its main provisions, and the last part will list some conflicting points if we have to compare the Draft Data Protection Act with the EC Directive 95/46. In the first part, I want to give some historical information why it is so tricky to have a Data Protection Act in Turkey. I will give some brief information about the work done so far in the last 10 years. Well, the formal start actually of data protection in Turkey dates back to the year 1981. This year the EC Convention for the Protection of Individuals with regard to automatic processing of personal data was signed, but this document has never entered into force. It is still waiting, it's on the agenda, but it was not addressed so far. Due to our EU accession efforts, a new working group was established in order to prepare a Draft Data Protection Act. I will shortly say DPA. This DPA firstly was prepared in 1999. This was never published and never discussed in the public. After a few years later, precisely in 2003, we had a second working group and a second draft was prepared, but this time it was published. This was also the first time we met in Ankara with Thomas, 2004. This version was examined by different authorities in Turkey. Mainly the Ministry of Justice was working on it, and the Office of the Prime Ministry. The final shape was given by the Prime Minister's office in 2008, and it was handed over to the Parliament at that time. This was the first time data protection as an issue was widely discussed in Turkish media also and in Turkish public. This draft act was discussed in a special commission in the parliament. It was widely rejected by its members, unfortunately. Therefore, it was never handed over to the General Assembly. However, due to the lack of public support, the draft act was waiting in the Commission of Justice at the Turkish Parliament until 2011, until the end of the legislature period. And by the end of this period, the draft, of course, lost its legal grounds. The Ministry of Justice appointed a new commission working on the draft act in 2012, and their work is still going on. The question whether the draft act might be enacted one day depends, actually, in my personal opinion, on the EU route of Turkey. Therefore, I can say it is not possible to know when the draft act will be adopted. We always say hopefully next year, but it has been now more than 10 years and we are still saying hopefully next year. So actually we really don't know when it will enter into force.